He gave his coat to a freezing stranger at the bus stop, then discovered she was a millionaire CEO. The November wind cut through downtown Seattle like a blade, sending fallen leaves skittering across the wet pavement as Daniel Morales pulled his worn leather jacket tighter around his shoulders. At 34, Daniel had learned to dress in layers during Seattle's unpredictable weather, but tonight felt particularly brutal. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since afternoon, and the weather app on his cracked phone screen promised it would only get worse. Daniel checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. The last bus of the night would arrive in 13 minutes, assuming it was on time. He'd just finished his shift at Mercy General Hospital, where he worked as a night custodian, and the 40-minute bus ride home to his small apartment in Renton was all that stood between him and a few hours of sleep before his morning shift at the construction site. Working 2 jobs wasn't Daniel's life plan, but it was his current reality. 3 years ago, an injury on a previous construction job had left him with medical bills that consumed most of his income, and the night custodian position helped him stay afloat while he paid off the debt. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and Daniel took pride in keeping the hospital clean and safe for the patients and staff who depended on it. As he waited at the bus stop, Daniel noticed he wasn't alone. About 10 feet away, a woman stood hunched against the cold, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as she shivered visibly in the harsh wind. She wore a thin blazer and office slacks, clothes that looked fine indoors but useless against the biting November wind. Her dark hair whipped around her face as she checked her phone repeatedly, her expression growing more frustrated with each glance at the screen. Daniel estimated she was in her late 20s or early 30s, with the kind of polished appearance that suggested she worked in one of the downtown office buildings. But despite her professional clothes, she looked miserable and underdressed for the sudden temperature drop. "Excuse me," Daniel called out gently, not wanting to startle her. "Are you okay?" The woman looked up, and Daniel could see that her lips had taken on a bluish tint from the cold. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice was tight with discomfort, and another violent shiver contradicted her words. "You don't look fine," Daniel said with a concerned smile. "This weather came out of nowhere, didn't it?" The woman managed a weak laugh. "You could say that. I was in meetings all day in a climate-controlled building. When I left the office 20 minutes ago, I thought it was still mild outside." She gestured helplessly at her inadequate clothing. "Clearly, I was wrong." Daniel looked at her shivering form and made a decision that felt as natural as breathing. He slipped off his leather jacket, immediately feeling the cold bite through his thin work shirt. "Here," he said, stepping toward her and extending the jacket. "Take this." The woman stared at the jacket, then at Daniel, her eyes wide with surprise. "I can't take your jacket. You'll freeze." "I've got layers," Daniel said, which wasn't entirely true. He had a thin t-shirt under his work shirt, but that hardly constituted layers. "Besides, you need it more than I do. That blazer isn't going to do much against this wind." "But I don't even know you," the woman protested, even as another violent shiver shook her frame. "I'm Daniel," he said simply, still holding out the jacket. "And you are?" "Victoria," she replied automatically. "Victoria Chen." "Nice to meet you, Victoria. Now please take the jacket before we both freeze to death arguing about it." Victoria looked at Daniel's earnest face, at the jacket being offered without expectation of anything in return, and her resistance crumbled. "Are you sure?" "Positive." Victoria accepted the jacket gratefully, and Daniel helped her slip it on. The jacket was far too big for her, but it immediately cut the wind, and Daniel could see some color returning to her cheeks. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with genuine gratitude. "This is incredibly kind." Don't mention it, Daniel replied, trying not to let his teeth chatter as the full force of the wind hit his now exposed arms. But won't you be cold? Victoria asked, noticing Daniel's obvious discomfort, despite his attempts to hide it. I'll be fine, Daniel lied cheerfully. I grew up in Minnesota. This is practically tropical. Victoria laughed despite her situation. Somehow, I doubt that. They stood in companionable silence for a few minutes, both watching for the bus. Daniel noticed that Victoria kept glancing at her phone with increasing frustration. Bus running late? He asked. Among other things, Victoria said with a sigh. My car broke down this morning, so I took ride shares to my meetings today. But apparently, there are no available drivers in downtown Seattle at midnight on a Tuesday. That's rough, Daniel sympathized. Where are you trying to get to? Bellevue, Victoria replied. I live on the east side. Daniel winced internally. Bellevue was at least a 40-minute drive from downtown, probably more with late-night traffic. That's going to be expensive in a cab. If I could find one, Victoria said ruefully. I've been trying for 20 minutes. Daniel considered this information. The bus that would arrive soon went to Renton, which was in completely the wrong direction for Victoria. She could transfer downtown, but the connections at this time of night were limited and would probably take her 2 hours to get home. You know, Daniel said carefully, I have a car. It's not much to look at, but it runs. I could give you a ride. Victoria looked at him with surprise and something that might have been suspicion. I couldn't ask you to do that. Bellevue is way out of your way. How do you know where my way is? Daniel asked with a grin. Because you're waiting for the bus, which means you don't live downtown. And this route heads south and east, not toward Bellevue. Daniel was impressed despite himself. You're observant. You're right. I live in Renton, but it's not that far out of the way. And honestly, you'll be warmer in my car than on 2 buses and a transfer. Victoria studied Daniel's face in the streetlight, clearly trying to assess whether accepting a ride from a stranger was wise. Daniel understood her hesitation. He was a large man she didn't know, offering to drive her to an isolated suburb late at night. I understand if you're not comfortable with that, Daniel said gently. I would be cautious too, but I promise you, I'm not trying to take advantage. I just think you shouldn't have to stand out in this cold any longer than necessary. Something in Daniel's tone seemed to convince Victoria. You really don't mind? I really don't mind. Okay, Victoria said, making a decision. But I'm paying for gas, and I insist on covering any bridge tolls or parking fees you might incur. Deal, Daniel agreed, though he had no intention of taking her money. Daniel's car was parked 6 blocks away in a downtown garage. Victoria kept the jacket on as they walked, while Daniel tried not to show his discomfort in the cold. What do you do for work? Victoria asked as they walked. I'm between careers right now, Daniel said diplomatically, working a couple of part-time jobs while I figure out my next move. Daniel's 15-year-old Honda Civic had over 200,000 miles and a dented passenger door, but it was clean and well-maintained. Sorry about the car, Daniel said, holding the passenger door open. It's not much, but it runs. It's perfect, Victoria said, settling in with obvious relief. And it's warm. As Daniel drove toward Bellevue, they talked about Seattle and their day. Victoria seemed surprisingly down to earth despite working in tech and living on the expensive East Side. You mentioned part-time jobs, Victoria said as they crossed the bridge. What kind of work? Custodial work at the hospital nights, construction during the day, Daniel replied. It's temporary while I pay off medical debt. I actually like the hospital job. There's something satisfying about keeping things clean and safe for patients. That sounds meaningful, Victoria said. What happened with the medical debt, if you don't mind me asking? Daniel's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. It's a long story. He forced a small smile. Let's just say, life threw me a curveball, and I've been digging out ever since. Victoria didn't press. She simply nodded and pointed ahead. Turn left here. That's my street. Victoria directed Daniel through Bellevue's winding residential streets until they reached her address, a modern townhouse in an upscale development that probably cost more than Daniel made in several years. This is beautiful, Daniel said as he pulled into her driveway. Thank you, Victoria replied. And thank you so much for the ride. You've been incredibly kind tonight. She started to remove the jacket, but Daniel stopped her. Keep it, he said. I can't keep your jacket, Victoria protested. This is leather. It must have cost a fortune. Daniel laughed. I bought it used for $40 3 years ago. It served me well, but I think it looks better on you anyway. Daniel, I can't. Please, Daniel interrupted gently. It makes me happy to know you'll stay warm. Besides, I have other jackets at home. This wasn't true. The leather jacket was Daniel's only good coat, but seeing Victoria warm and safe felt more important than his own comfort. Victoria looked at Daniel for a long moment, her expression soft, with something that looked like amazement. I don't know how to thank you. You gave me your jacket, drove me home, and now you won't even let me pay for gas or keep your coat. Why are you being so kind to a complete stranger? Daniel considered the question. I guess because someone helped me once when I needed it, and it made all the difference. I figure kindness is supposed to keep moving, you know? Victoria nodded slowly. I wish more people thought that way. Maybe they do, and we just don't always get to see it. As Victoria got out of the car, she turned back one more time. Daniel, can I ask you something? Sure. That injury you mentioned, the one that caused your medical bills? What happened? Daniel hesitated, then decided there was no point in being evasive. I fell off scaffolding 3 years ago, Daniel explained. Broke my back in 2 places. Insurance covered most of it, but most of a huge bill is still significant money. Are you fully recovered? Mostly. Some limitations on heavy lifting, which is why I do custodial instead of full construction. But I'm grateful to be walking. Victoria was quiet for a moment. I want to give you my business card. There might be opportunities at my company for someone with your experience. She reached for her card, then paused with an odd expression. Actually, I should tell you something first. I haven't been completely honest about who I am. Daniel felt a familiar sinking sensation. In his experience, when people said they hadn't been honest, it usually meant trouble. Okay, he said carefully. Victoria took a deep breath. My name is Victoria Chen, and I'm the CEO and founder of Chen Industries. We're a technology and construction management company with offices in 12 cities. Daniel stared at her, processing this information. CEO, he repeated. Yes, and millionaire, in case you were wondering about that part too. Daniel looked at the business card in Victoria's hand, then at the expensive townhouse, then back at Victoria's face. So, when you said you work in tech, I wasn't lying, Victoria said quickly. I do work in tech. I just left out some details about the scope of my role. Daniel laughed, surprising himself. You're kidding me. I know how this must look. It looks like I just gave my jacket to someone who could probably buy 100 jackets without thinking about it, Daniel said, but his tone was more amused than upset. That's exactly what it looks like, Victoria admitted. And I feel terrible about it. I should have told you who I was. Why didn't you? Victoria was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. Do you know what it's like to never be sure if people are being kind to you because of who you are or because of what you can do for them? Daniel thought about this. No, I can't say that I do. Tonight, for the first time in years, someone was kind to me just because it was the right thing to do. You didn't know I was wealthy. You didn't know I could help your career. You didn't know anything about me except that I was cold and needed help. And you helped anyway. Victoria looked down at the jacket she was wearing. This jacket isn't worth $40 to me, Daniel. It's priceless because it represents the first genuine kindness I've received from a stranger in longer than I can remember. Victoria, I would have offered the jacket regardless. I know that now, Victoria said. That's what makes you remarkable. She held out the business card again. This is why I want to do something for you. Not because I feel guilty about the jacket, but because meeting you tonight reminded me what business should really be about. Daniel took the card, noting the heavy cardstock and elegant design. What do you mean? I want to establish a workplace safety foundation in your name, the Daniel Morales Workers Safety Foundation. It would provide financial assistance to injured workers, fund better safety equipment for construction sites, and advocate for stronger safety protocols industry-wide. Daniel's heart began to race. Victoria, that's incredible, but I couldn't accept something like that. You're not accepting charity, Victoria interrupted. You're accepting recognition for something important. Your injury happened because of preventable safety failures. How many other workers are going through exactly what you went through right now? She paused, then continued. Daniel, in the 45 minutes we spent together tonight, you showed me more genuine leadership than most executives I know. You saw someone who needed help, and you helped without calculating the cost. That's exactly the kind of perspective this foundation needs. But I don't know anything about running a foundation. You know everything about what injured workers actually need, Victoria said firmly. You've lived it. You understand the financial burden, the physical challenges, the way the system fails people who get hurt on the job. Victoria smiled. The foundation would start with $1 million endowment, and I'd want you to serve as the primary advisor. We'd hire staff to handle the administrative work, but your job would be to ensure we're actually helping people in meaningful ways. Daniel stared at the business card, hardly believing what he was hearing. $1 million? To start. If the foundation proves successful, and I believe it will, we'll expand the funding significantly. Daniel's legs nearly gave out. A foundation in his name, dedicated to helping people like him. It was more than he'd ever dreamed possible. I don't know what to say, he said honestly. Say you'll think about it, Victoria replied. And Daniel, tonight changed something for me. Seeing how you treated a complete stranger reminded me that wealth should be used to solve real problems. You reminded me what I should be doing with my resources. She gestured toward her townhouse. I live in this beautiful house, and I have more money than I could spend in a lifetime. But I've been so focused on growing the business that I forgot what business should be for. You reminded me that it should be about creating opportunities for good people to build good lives. Daniel looked at Victoria's earnest face, at the jacket that had somehow become a bridge between two completely different worlds. "There's one condition," he said finally. "What's that?" "I keep the jacket." Victoria laughed, the sound bright and genuine in the cold night air. "Deal." 2 years later, Daniel stood in the conference room of the Daniel Morales Worker Safety Foundation, presenting the year-end report to the board of directors. The foundation had grown beyond anyone's initial expectations, providing assistance to over 300 injured workers and funding safety improvements at construction sites across the Pacific Northwest. The foundation's headquarters occupied 2 floors of a downtown Seattle office building, with a staff of 12 dedicated professionals who handled everything from direct financial assistance to safety training programs. But Daniel remained the heart of the operation, reviewing every case personally and ensuring that help reached the workers who needed it most. The leather jacket still hung in Daniel's office, now symbolic of the night that had changed not just his life, but the lives of hundreds of other injured workers. Victoria had insisted on keeping her own jacket as well, a reminder, she said, of the person she wanted to be. "The numbers are impressive," Victoria said as Daniel concluded his presentation to the board. "But what I'm most proud of is the personal impact." "Daniel, tell them about Maria." Daniel smiled, thinking of Maria Gonzalez, a roofer who had fallen 3 months ago and broken both legs. The foundation had covered her medical expenses that insurance wouldn't pay, provided groceries for her family during her recovery, and helped her transition to a desk job at a construction company that had implemented the foundation's safety protocols. "Maria sent us a card last week," Daniel said. "She's back to work, her family is stable, and she said the foundation gave her hope when everything seemed impossible. That's why we do this work." Daniel's role as director of the foundation had transformed his own life as well. The position came with a salary that had allowed him to pay off his medical debt and help his parents with their mortgage. But more importantly, it had given him a sense of purpose that made every day meaningful. Victoria had changed too since that night at the bus stop. She had restructured Chen Industries to prioritize worker safety and had become a vocal advocate for construction industry reform. The foundation was just one of several charitable initiatives she had launched, but it remained closest to her heart. "Ready to visit the new training center?" Victoria asked after the board meeting concluded. "Always," Daniel replied, grabbing his jacket from the office closet. The foundation's latest project was a state-of-the-art safety training facility where construction workers could learn proper techniques for working at heights, using heavy equipment, and recognizing hazardous conditions. It was the kind of training that might have prevented Daniel's own accident. As they headed toward the elevator, Victoria paused. "Daniel, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't offered me your jacket that night?" Daniel considered the question. "Sometimes. But then I remember that kindness isn't about the outcome. Whether you'd turned out to be a millionaire, CEO, or just someone who needed help getting home, offering you the jacket was still the right thing to do." Victoria smiled. "That's exactly why this foundation works." As they descended toward the garage, Daniel reflected on the strange mathematics of kindness. He'd given away a $40 jacket to keep a stranger warm, and somehow, that simple gesture had created a foundation that was changing lives across the region. But the real miracle wasn't the foundation, or the resources, or even the chance to help other injured workers. The real miracle was the discovery that one moment of genuine compassion could create connections that transformed not just individual lives, but entire communities. The Daniel Morales Worker Safety Foundation had become a model for other cities, inspiring similar initiatives across the country. Construction companies were implementing better safety protocols, injured workers were getting the support they needed, and families were being protected from the financial devastation that had once seemed inevitable. And somewhere in Seattle, at construction sites made safer by the foundation's advocacy, workers were going home to their families each night without injury. Daniel liked to believe that kindness was still moving, still finding ways to protect and heal in ways that would ripple outward long after the original gesture was forgotten. Sometimes the simplest acts of kindness open doors we never knew existed, not because we give to receive, but because genuine compassion creates connections that transcend every barrier. If this story inspired you to believe in the power of everyday kindness, please like, subscribe, and join us for more soulful stories that remind us we're all more connected than we know.